In this video, what we're going to do is be going over Chapter 7, talking about training. Okay, they're the learning objectives for this section. Now, what training is basically trying to learn new skills. What we're talking about here is increasing the skills, knowledge, and abilities that people have. Very important. The thing is, companies are changing. Work is changing, business is changing, and so people need to have new skills at all times. I was working with one company some years ago, and we were putting together a career development process, and that would have all kinds of training and things like that. And I was talking with this one woman who said, basically, don't even talk to me about development. Don't even try to develop me. I'm 3 years away from retirement. I don't want to do anything different. My response was basically, okay, that's cool. You don't want to do anything different than that. The problem is the business is changing, and you may find yourself excess or unskilled for what it is that the business needs before you're ready to retire. So it's really important to make sure that you're aware of how the business is changing and what kinds of skills, knowledge, and abilities people are going to need as far as keeping that business going. Now, there's all kinds of different instructional designs, and the whole idea behind design is making sure that you're matching what it is that people need to do with how you're going to actually teach them to do that. When you think about the stages of it, it starts off with needs assessment, trying to figure out, okay, so what is it that people are going to be needing and how are we going to get them to that? Making sure that people are ready for the training that's necessary. You put together your program, implement, and then evaluate your results. And evaluation is really important because if you're not doing any kind of evaluation, you don't know if what you're doing is actually making a difference. Now, one of the things to think about is what kind of learning management system your business is going to be using to track all of that. Right now, you're using Canvas. Canvas is a learning management system. What it does is it captures what it is that you have done and holds on to those records for the longer term. You start off with a needs assessment. You start figuring out, okay, so what is it that people need to be able to do? What is it that the organization needs as far as the skills, knowledge, and abilities that are necessary? And the way I really approach it is, what do people need to be able to do? So you start looking at the organization. What is it that the organization needs as far as in regards to their strategy and what kind of resources are available? And also, are they going to support it? One of the worst things you can do is take a person, put them in a training class, they come back changed, and you put them in an unchanged environment. You have lost that investment that you made in that person. You think about the person as far as the analysis is concerned. Who is it, and what kinds of things do they need to be able to do? And are they ready for it? Are they motivated? Are they understanding why they're going through this training? And you also need to think about the task itself. Earlier we talked about task analysis and designing jobs and things like that. You use that to figure out, okay, so what is it that we need to train these people on? What kinds of safety is going to be necessary? What kind of equipment are they going to be using? That sort of thing. The things that people need to understand when it comes to management is that they need to support the training. They need to understand how it relates to what it is that the person is doing. Are you going to evaluate that person's use of those new skills, knowledge, and abilities in their jobs? You need to support their use of it when they come back to work. In other words, doing the coaching and everything so that they can build those skills. Making sure that people understand how they're going to use it and why they're going before they even go. And give them feedback as far as what they're doing in relation to the new skills, knowledge, and abilities that are necessary. And it says here, if possible, be a trainer. That is something that I'm a huge believer in. Managers need to be able to train people. When you start thinking about the planning, all right, you start off with the objectives. And I talk about learning objectives. What is it that people need to be able to do when they're finished with this training? What is it that they need to be able to know? Your objectives need to have things like, what kind of expectations do you have for the people who are going through the training and when they're done? What kind of conditions are they going to be using that stuff? How are they going to be measured as far as doing that job or doing that task that they're being trained on? You can do your training in-house or you can contract it out. I have done lots and lots of training when I was working for Hallmark and when I was working for Marion Labs. I was doing the training in-house as an independent consultant ever since 2000. I have been one of those that they contract out to. And so I've made a very nice living as far as doing training and education for organizations here in the United States and also overseas. There's different types of training methods. Now, this method right here, the presentation, you get the information, the download of stuff. That's not training, folks. All that is education. Education is learning about something. Training is learning to do something. So when you start talking about true training, you're looking at the hands-on methods like OJT, on the job training, where you're teaching specific skills. You can also have team training where teams or groups get together, go through various things together, and they're learning about themselves, about each other as a team, and then also how do we work together as a team. When you start thinking about the instructional methods that's typically used, most of it is going to be instructor-led classroom still. Now, one of the things that's happening with more and more technology coming into play, you're getting more and more of the computer-based training and the blended methods. In other words, some classrooms, some online types of things. Now, when you start talking about webcasts and virtual classrooms and mobile only, those aren't very effective as far as training methods are concerned. Your classroom instruction most times is most effective. And the reason is because the instructor can tell when somebody's not getting something, can coach them on, things like that. One of the things that I disagree with and I don't particularly care for is video conferencing. You can't do a training, quote unquote, training class via video conferencing. I've tried these things where you had people in multiple locations sitting in conference rooms and they had the video or the audio on or things like this. They're not getting it. So many times they just kind of check out. So I really prefer other methods as far as the training is concerned. Right now you're doing some e-learning, okay, and where you are going through and utilizing the technology and the computers to get the information that you need. Now, an electronic performance support system is like a giant help system where maybe you have a task that needs to be done. And what it does is it says, okay, step one is this, step two is this. And if you need help, it can give you some of the help and walk you through each of the various steps that are necessary. OJT, on the job training, is really the best ones where people are actually seeing somebody do it and then they do it themselves and they're getting coaching to do those things. You also have simulations, okay? So maybe one of the things you can do is simulations. My brother-in-law is doing quite a bit right now with virtual reality, where he's designing, he's actually working with PBS, Public Broadcasting System, putting together some virtual reality training for some of the schools. You have business games, case studies. I'm sure you've experienced those in some of your classes. Behavior modeling is, you may have been through some of that training, where a concept is presented. So in other words, say it's coaching, and a model as far as here are the steps that are necessary. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. You watch a video of someone who's actually utilizing those steps in doing that skill. Then what happens is you actually practice that through role playing and getting feedback from other folks. You may have experienced that with Zinger Miller or Chief Global or some of those types of company provided training and education. You have experiential programs, things like adventure learning. Now, when you start talking about adventure learning, that's going to be like doing high ropes course or having your team go through down a river rapids and things like that. The whole idea behind the adventure learning is you're learning about yourself, you're learning about your team and how to work together as a team. You've been through this experience together. Many times what it does is it gives people some good feelings about each other. It doesn't necessarily teach them that much about how to work together as a team. So that's the team training. One of the things that I did as a manager many times was a lot of cross training. I wanted to make sure that if somebody was out, somebody else could step into step in and do their job. When you start talking about the implementation, you have to think about principles of learning, particularly when you're dealing with adults. Adults do not like to learn new stuff. They have to have an understanding as far as why do I need to learn this and how am I going to use this tomorrow? So it's best to link it to the current task that they're doing, have them practice it, and then hold them accountable for doing it after they're done. The transfer of training is going to be necessary, and that's primarily from a managerial aspect. What are you doing to support the training when they go back to the workplace? Training also needs to be measured, and there's various ways of measuring it. Trainee satisfaction. So in other words, that's the kind of thing where was the room comfortable? Was the food okay? At the end of a semester, when you do an evaluation of the course, that's basically what you're doing, is just that level 1 trainee satisfaction. The transfer of training and the new skills and knowledge is typically done through testing. In other words, and many times, one of the things that I've done in some of my training classes for businesses is give them a pre-test. Here are the things that they might need to know, and then do that same test at the end of the session and see the increase as far as what did they get, what did they not get, things like that. Performance improvement is where you are actually stepping back and getting feedback on, are they using these kinds of skills? I've done that in the past for some of the things I've done for companies. And what it typically is they, at the, say, maybe a month after the training, people are getting feedback. Are they using these skills, knowledge, and abilities? Then maybe 3 months, and then maybe a year after. So what it's doing is it's looking at different times to see, did that training actually take? Is it actually being used? The highest level of measurement is return on investment. And many times it's kind of difficult to achieve, where you look at what did it cost as far as sending this person to training. Now, what are we doing as far as getting a return from that? What kind of costs have been reduced? What kind of increases in sales have we gotten? ROI measurements for training many times is very difficult to get. However, it can be done. When you start thinking about the types of training that's necessary, when somebody comes to the company and starts, one of the first things that's typically done is orientation. In other words, getting them familiar with what are the rules, regulations, and the policies and things like that of the organization, and also helping them learn more about what the culture is like. The onboarding process is typically done when the person goes to that job, where they might have a mentor who's showing them around, here's where the bathrooms are and things like that, and then helping them learn what their new job is going to be. When you start thinking about the onboarding process, you have your compliance aspect. What are the rules and regulations? You have the clarification, where people need to understand what are the expectations for the job. Understand the company history and the culture. They need to be able to fit in. And then also the connection. Who are you working with? When I started work at Marion Labs, my first month was taken up with nothing but meetings, learning and getting to know various people in the organization. That was a big part of the learning the culture, and also developing the networking that was necessary for the job to be effective. So those are the key points for this chapter. If you have questions, please give me a shout.